Hello, thank you for joining us today for the third and final part of the documentary workshop series, Editing Your Story. My name is Gavin Spores, I'm a NICO Outreach Officer at Norwich University of the Arts, and I'm also a film and moving image graduate from there as well. So with the resources today, we're going to be looking at Adobe Rush during the presentation, so you won't need it during this workshop, but you will need to download the app after the presentation, which can be done on any Android, iOS, mobile device, tablets, or any other desktop computer setup as well. I'll go into more details on the application during this presentation. So today we're going to be looking at two main points. So we're going to be looking at how to craft your story from your footage. So a lot more of the theoretical and academic side of editing and how and why. And then we're going to be looking practically into how to edit using Adobe Rush. So the first point I want to get across when it comes to editing a documentary is one that I've echoed in the previous session, where documentaries are stories told by people, whether it be real life crime dramas, experimental documentary feature films, or simple behind the scenes interviews of film and TV projects. The people are the ones telling your story. So even after production and during post-production, that still is a key point to keep in mind when you're finishing off your projects. So how to craft a story? Well, the first place to start is watching through all of your footage, which seems like a daunting task, especially if you've got hours and hours of footage. And I can't stress enough the importance of looking through all of the footage there, because you never know what you're going to get, especially with the unpredictable nature of documentary filmmaking. You don't quite know exactly what footage you've captured, so it's really important to look through every single piece of footage that you got, because you never know what story you're going to be dragging out at the end. So watch all of your footage, and then from there you'll be able to start putting the pieces together. And when you're starting there, you want to refer back to your subject and your story that you had in mind at the start. That story might have molded a little bit depending on what's happened during the production process, but really it's referring back to the original story and themes that you wanted to get across at the start. So you might find that when editing and putting the story together, it might be really similar to the story that you kind of predicted at the start, or it could be vastly different, but it's about keeping in line with your original vision as much as you can in the original story. And it's just really helpful because it can be quite daunting when you've got all of this footage and you just don't know where to start. So always refer back to your subject and story that you originally came up with. And another key point is finding the tone and structure that's going to really help putting your story together here. So in terms of tone, this all depends on the people that you've interviewed. They might have gone through stories that are a little bit more mature and going on quite important themes, or it could have been a bit more light-hearted. You might find that there's actually a lot more comedy within the interviews that you've got, and that's going to dictate the style of the story that you're telling. So finding that tone, whether it be more comical or more serious or something else, help find a tone that rings out throughout the whole of your story there. But also the structure, very similar to fiction filmmaking. You still need to find your beginning, and your middle and your end. And for those who have done filmmaking in the past and are looking into a lot more of the precise points of the story, you're going to be finding your inciting incident or your midpoint or your climax in the third act. It's still all the same as fiction filmmaking. So find your tone and find the structure of the story. That's going to help put all the pieces together. But as I keep saying, I sound like a broken record, but it's so true and so important. The story is going to come from the characters, and it's going to be the people that you've interviewed. They're going to be the ones dictating the tone of the story and what information they give you is going to help you structure the overall story. So, how to edit? First of all, once you've kind of got your plan of your overall narrative that you want to show, you still need to make sure that you've watched all of your footage. Again, because I know it's really easy to think, oh, okay, this series of shots, oh, I know exactly what happened. But can you remember exactly frame by frame what you've captured? So again, I cannot stress this enough. It's important to watch through all of your footage because there could be a single shot or even a single frame that just adds something magical to your overall story that you can put somewhere within your edit. So watch through all your footage because you really don't know what you're going to get. So the second thing to think about is introducing the language and story early on. So language, I mean the style of shooting. As an editor, you're manipulating what you have already. So in terms of introducing the language of the story, it could be that you've got quite a fast-paced story. You know, it's a series that's quite chopped up of these little shots and it's quite fast-paced. And usually that either reflects like a building tension, and it can make things quite serious and tense, or with fast pacing, it could be that it's a lot more light-hearted, maybe even comical, or in terms of the language using editing skills, you could let shots just play out naturally, which is quite good for letting audiences focus on and really live in that scene or that moment. So whether it be you're editing lots of fast little shots or you're letting shots just play out naturally over a long time, you need to dictate which kind of editing style you're going to go with throughout your story and also making it consistent as well. And what I mean with getting to the story early on is, especially when you're working on a 3-minute documentary, you need to get through that beginning very quickly so you can get to the meat of the story. It's introducing the story as early as possible, and especially in a 3-minute documentary, that needs to be introduced to the audience, the idea and the subject that you want to explore in the film that they're watching in about the first 30 seconds, a minute at the longest. The audience doesn't get bored, they're not confused, and they understand exactly what they're watching. And you need to introduce that as early as possible. And of course, good old B-roll. You need to use the B-roll to enhance the story. So picking out the shots that best reflect what's happening in the interview at that current moment. And really, at the end of it all, with the edit, it's whittling it down to the core meaning. You might have hours and hours of footage, but we've got a 3-minute runtime here. So you need to really boil everything down into core idea and the message that you want to get across to your audience. A good piece of advice is don't immediately strive for that 3-minute runtime. You might whittle down all your footage into, say, a 7-minute film, and then you might cut that down further into a 5-minute film, and then from there you need to be really ruthless with your editing and think, okay, this shot doesn't add anything to the story, so it needs to cut. It needs to go. It might be a really nice looking shot, but if it doesn't add anything to the story, it doesn't need to be there. So it gets to a point where it's really ruthless, but it will make your story so much stronger. So we're going to be editing on Adobe Rush, which is a stripped back version of Adobe Premiere Pro, which is, you may know, a professional piece of editing software. The great thing about Adobe Rush is that if you're only using it to export your projects at a maximum of 3 times, then it's completely free. And the only thing you have to do is just create a Adobe account, which again is completely free to do. And the other beautiful thing about Adobe Rush is that you can use it on quite literally anything. It's available on Apple iOS devices, so your iPhones, your iPads, or you can use it on Android devices. So any of your Samsung phones or tablets or any other Android device. And of course you can use it on your computer or your Mac. It literally works on anything. So this is what you see when you first open up Adobe Rush on whatever device you're using. And even though Adobe Rush has it has a really good tutorial that you can use just to get to grips with the software. But I'm going to go through a lot of the major points and how you can use it for your documentary projects that you're working on. So it will first ask you to select all the different shots and files that you want to edit together, and it will automatically bunch them up together, and this is what you'll see. So we've got a viewfinder there slap bang in the middle of the screen, so that's kind of your viewing of what you've edited so far, and then at the bottom you've got your timeline there. And like I said, it just bunches all your shots together, but this is where we're going to be chopping about and playing about with all your footage. And in terms of actually navigating it, obviously on people using Macs, laptops, PCs, kind of desktop setups, it's going to be using a mouse. But for those working on mobile devices and tablets, it's really intuitive and easy to use with just 2 finger swipes. If you're pinching your fingers together, you'll be able to zoom in into your timeline and zoom out. And also if you want to go through, it's just quick swipe of the finger, and of course using the different taskbars. So if you got on the bottom left of the screen, that's where you got your cutting tools and whatnot. And then on the right hand side, you got some more tools there. A thing before I start going into cutting up and whatnot is to separate the audio files. So it just helps later on when we look at the audio settings, it just helps you distinguish the audio from the footage and gives you a little bit more control. So a simple tap of a certain clip, you'll see some options there, and you just click separate audio and it'll put your audio onto a separate line on the timeline, and it just helps distinguish between footage and audio, because also you might want to be creative and play some audio at the start of different shots, and it just gives you a little bit more flexibility with the editing there. We're going to be focusing on the taskbar on the top right hand side of the screen of your application screen there, and we're just going to go through each of the functions. So first of all, we have titling, which you might have seen in different documentaries, where on the bottom left you've got the person being interviewed, their name, and it can be their job description or some other description that has some relevance to the story that you're exploring. The only problem with the title options in Adobe Rush is that you don't actually have control of exactly where on the frame that you position your title, which is a little bit annoying. But like in the example there on the screen, I've clicked on the basic lower third left option, which is where you have a lot of the titles traditionally placed, and it does a good enough job. I would personally like it to be tucked into the corner a little bit more, but it still does the job. It's not, slap bang in the middle or elsewhere in a frame. It's nice and tucked away there, and it's not in the way of the person being interviewed. And you can edit the style slightly. I'm pretty sure there's different fonts, options and whatnot. So there's a little bit of flexibility with the creativeness there. But overall, it does a good job of, if you want to do a title sequence, or if you want to label anything during the documentary, the titles do a good enough job. So second of all, we're looking at transitions. To be honest, you're probably not going to do anything too crazy with the transition options here. I imagine a lot of you would just use it to fade into your story and then fade out at the end, which a good old cross dissolve will do the job nicely. And it doesn't look like there's many options, but you don't really need to do too much with the transitions, to be honest. Or you could have it in the middle if there's like a clear act structure that you might play with the transitions there. But overall, I would suggest just dragging the cross dissolve on the beginning and the end of your documentary projects. But there's a little bit of control in when you see the transition on the timeline there, you can actually click on that separately from the footage, and you can dictate how long that transition goes on for. So you might want to play around with that a little bit. So third of all, color, and Adobe Rush has a surprising amount of control with the color settings here. So if you look on the left hand, where the frame on the left there, sorry, and you'll see that there's a lot of presets, which some of them are better than others, but there's a certain kind of mood that you want to go for with the color grading, and you find a good preset, then you can just go ahead and use that. But if you see in the color setting on the right hand side, and you've got two different menus, you've got one for presets and one for edit. And if you click on the edit and you see on the image on the right there, it unlocks a lot of options for your color grading. So you can change your exposure, your contrast, your highlights, your saturation. You can really play around and really go crazy with your color grading there. But obviously, like everything with color grading, you need to make sure it's consistent with every single shot in your story. So if you create a color grade for one shot, you need to make sure that you save it as a preset, and then you can replicate that on all the other shots. But even then, because of different lighting in different scenes, you might need to tweak the preset that you have a little bit. But other than that, Adobe Rush has a really robust selection of color grading options there, which is really nice. So speed, again, like transitions, you're probably not going to play around with this too much. But for those who have maybe shot some B-roll footage at a higher frame rate, be it 60 frames per second or even 120, or I think it's 240 frames per second options on some devices as well, this is where you're going to be slowing down the footage, and you're going to get some really nice slow motion. But other than that, there isn't really any use for the speed function here. So audio, which is just as important as the visuals here, but hopefully you've got some really good audio recorded from when you're shooting in production. But if not, there's a few options to try and fix your audio to make it sound a little bit better. So we've got some balanced sound, and we've got some reduction of background noise if you're hearing any kind of anything detracting away from the dialogue in your interviews. Then there's some options which might help it a little bit. It won't be perfect if you've got some audio that you need to fix and using these options, but it will be a lot better than if any of your audio hasn't come out as good. And obviously there's a volume control as well at the top of your audio options there, but just be wary that if you're boosting the audio too high, then you're going to lose the quality of your audio clip. So you need to balance out having it nice and clear for the audience to hear, but also with the quality of the audio as well. So the transform option, much like transitions and speeds, you probably won't use it too much, but if you click on your clip and click transform, you can shrink the frame, you can make it bigger, you can mirror it, rotate it, do crazy stuff, but you're not really going to play with that much at all, unless you're thinking about showing your documentary on different platforms. So under the viewfinder, you've got this kind of two rectangular shapes and a little icon. If you click that, then you see these options of actually changing the whole aspect ratio. So obviously it's set in landscape as normal, because that's how we usually view films, but there's also the option of having the aspect ratio portrait or square, which a lot of you probably figured out already is used for mostly Instagram, but also other social media channels as well. So if you're thinking about showing your documentary projects on Instagram and sharing on Twitter and Facebook, these might be options that you want to be thinking about. When you click the option of having it in portrait or square, then obviously like this frame where we've got our subject on the left of the frame there, if I click portrait, you probably won't be able to see her at all, which is where the transform functions come into use. Because with every single shot, you're going to have to readjust the position of your frame. So for example, if I click portrait here and I want to export this project and use it for Instagram, then I'm going to have to move my subject into the center frame here so people can actually see her do the interview. So think about your audience and where you're actually going to show your documentary. So you might export it once as a whole landscape project, and you might export the project again, but in the portrait or square ratios, so then you can show it on Instagram as well. So this is kind of overall what my timeline looked like when I finished a project and exported it, and hopefully yours will look a little similar. So we've got, if you look at the top of the timeline, that's where we've got a title in there, and then just below that we've got some of the B-roll footage which is laid over the top of the main interview segments, and then below we've got our audio, which you can see we've got some audio playing over other footage outside of the interview, so it's all edited together nicely. And then at the bottom there, which is something I haven't mentioned yet, is music tracks. So if you look on the taskbar on the left hand side, and just below the bin icon, I believe, if you click that button, Adobe Rush actually has a whole suite of music tracks which you can use. Obviously, for documentary projects or any project, it's always better to have custom made music, but we don't, I mean, you might be a musician, which is great, and you can create it yourself and import it into your Adobe Rush project, or, you know, I'm not a musician, so I'm not going to be sitting here making music tracks myself. But also, if you go for, if you reach out to someone else to create a track for you, you know, be a musician or composer, that's obviously going to cost money. So Adobe Rush has a few free music tracks, which, you know, they're okay, but, you know, with what we're dealing with, we're using free applications, we're doing this, we're making a documentary on no budget, so it's a really good option to have if you don't have a musician with you. So put in the music there at the bottom, and of course, like everything else, you need to make sure that the music helps elevate the story that you tell. But this is overall what my timeline looked like when I finished my documentary project. So that concludes not just editing your story, but also the whole documentary filmmaking series. And for those who've joined us for each step of the way, thank you very much for joining in. I hope you found everything useful, and I would love to see your projects that you've all created. So we've got, like always, we've got our Twitter handles and Instagram handles at the bottom. Do message us or tag us into any of your work. We'd love to see it. And if you want to learn more about the Nico project and the other workshops that we're delivering, do give us an email on art@takeyourplace.ac.uk. But yet again, thank you for joining us, and thank you for taking part in the whole documentary filmmaking series. We hope to see you soon at some of our other workshops. Thank you very much, and take care.